You know, no one likes being short of breath. Imagine being short of breath as part of your daily life, your daily routine. That's too often the case for those who struggle with COPD. Henry Roberts is our guest today. He joins us now from Toronto, and he's the co-founder of the Chronic Obstructive Pulmonary Disease Association of Canada. Henry, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, how would you best describe COPD, Henry?
Okay, well, COPD is an acronym that stands for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Within that broader definition, there are three categories of condition. One is chronic bronchitis, the second is emphysema, and the third is alpha 1 antitrypsin deficiency. I'll just review those. In chronic bronchitis, the airways become inflamed and narrowed. And this leads to increased production of mucus, causing a persistent cough and difficulty in breathing. In emphysema, it involves the destruction of the air sacs, the alveoli in the lungs, which results in a reduction of the surface area for oxygen exchange. People with emphysema experience shortness of breath, reduced lung function, and extreme bouts of breathlessness. Alpha 1 antitrypsin deficiency, this is a genetic disorder that people are born with a problem with a protein called the alpha 1 antitrypsin protein. And this makes them very susceptible to catching COPD. And they often catch alpha 1 emphysema. Those people, it's only about 5 or 10% of the population of COPDers, but they have to be extremely careful not to expose themselves to secondhand smoke or the dusty environment. So those are the three categories of COPD.
So, Henry, how many people are affected by this condition here in Canada?
Well, according to Statistics Canada, more than 840,000 people have been diagnosed with COPD and are living with the challenges. The Canadian Lung Association estimates that there are upward of 2 million people who have COPD, and about half have not been diagnosed and are unaware that they have the condition.
You know, some of my family members who used to smoke, they suffer from COPD now. But what are some of the other causes of COPD? And is it really preventable?
Well, it is preventable. The easiest way to prevent COPD is never to smoke cigarettes. And now we're dealing with vaping as well. So you have to keep away from those things. Cigarette smoking is the largest cause of COPD. Considering the forest fires that have been happening out west, it's very well out down east as well. It's very important to protect yourself from inhaling those airborne particulates. And if you're working in an environment that, let's say, a welder, you've got to really be careful as to how much you're inhaling. There's some very good medicines that, if you do catch COPD, that can alleviate the symptoms.
So, for those who suspect that they may have COPD, Henry, what are some of the symptoms then?
Well, there's breathlessness, there's wheezing, there's the extreme increased mucus production. The people with chronic bronchitis, it's been described to me that they wake up in the morning and they're drowning in their own phlegm. Those are the primary symptoms of COPD, or also fatigue. And you will discover what will happen is that you'll start to do activities that used to not wind you, and you'll suddenly become winded, whether that be going up the stairs, going for a brief walk. And a lot of people, particularly smokers, blame it on getting older and being out of shape, when in fact, it's their lungs. They've damaged their lungs, and they have to get to their doctor to undergo what's called a spirometry test, which measures your lung function.
So, is there any way to really reverse COPD then?
No, it's a chronic disease, and you're just going to get worse. They can alleviate the symptoms. As I mentioned, there are very good medicines that are available out there, and most of them are covered on the provincial formularies.
You touch base on one of the tests. Are there other tests available to really check if we have COPD?
Yeah, there are a variety of lung function tests that the doctor will walk you through. The primary one, however, is the spirometry test, and that's the one with World COPD Day, the occasion of World COPD Day. We're really pushing people to go and get a spirometry test if they suspect that they might have COPD.
When my son was younger, he battled asthma and he used one of his inhalers, which helped him to breathe. Would you consider something like that very similar for somebody struggling with COPD to help them breathe easier too?
Yeah, totally. Once you've been diagnosed with by spirometry, which measures how forcefully you can exhale in 1 second, and that's compared to normal people of the same age, sex, and height. And the COPD is measured in stages. So at stage one, your forced expiratory volume is about 80% of what a normal person like you would normally exhale. And you go through these, so you will get worse over time. And as you get worse over time, your spirometry volume drops and your stage of COPD increases. So it's kind of an inverse relationship. So when you're at stage 4 COPD, your spirometry, your ability to exhale is about 20 less than 30% of a normal person's ability to exhale. Now, based on your stages, the doctors will prescribe different kinds of medicines. So they usually start you on a bronchodilator, a LAMA or a LABA, and these open up your airways. As you get worse and worse over time, they will add a corticosteroid. So you'd be taking, with brand names, would be like a Spiriva and an Advair, or a Spiriva and Symbicort. Those are two combinations. In the last few years, the drug industry has developed triple therapy. So it's basically what I just described in one puffer. And there are two on the market now. One's called Breztri and the other is called Trelegy. And what's coming down the pipe are new biologics, which further enhance the ability of these medicines to reduce inflammation, which is the big issue here. It's the same in asthma.
So, Henry, does diet and exercise really play much of a role in managing COPD?
Diet and exercise will, if you're able to, if people have access to pulmonary rehab facilities in their area, we highly recommend that they get into those classes, because they will teach you how to rebreathe. As we get older, we tend to become shallow breathers. We're breathing off the top of the chest, as opposed to when we were young. If you look at a little baby, you watch their belly go up and down as they breathe. They're really using their diaphragm to breathe. And the pulmonary rehab will reteach you how to breathe from the diaphragm. They'll also teach you how to exercise your lung muscles. They will push the need to be active, to go out for your daily walk if the weather permits, and also to moderate your diet, because obviously if you're obese, that affects your ability to breathe.
Now, when it comes to drug coverage here in our country in Canada, is it fairly consistent in helping those who are struggling with COPD?
It's not consistent at all. In Alberta, where you are, the coverage is actually pretty good. In the East Coast, it's terrible. And Ontario, we're kind of in the middle range now. I mentioned these new biologics that are coming. They have not been approved for coverage. And in our case, for the Chronic Obstructive Pulmonary Disease Association, most of our members are over 65. Our membership ranges from 65 to 90. So it's pretty imperative that the medicines that I've mentioned and the new ones coming are covered on the provincial drug plans. It's a financial imperative for our members in particular.
Henry, let's talk a little bit about some of the unmet needs in COPD. What are they?
Well, one of the big unmet need is access to pulmonary rehab. And I have been insistent that people get a spirometry test, but the availability of spirometry testing, again, is really spotty across the country. I was in a meeting the other day with a respirologist from Quebec up in the Gatineau area, and she's unable to get spirometry testing, even for her patients with COPD. It's just not available. The other issue with the testing is that it should ideally be available in a doctor's office and if you're in a medical clinic, for sure. But that too is not happening. There's one doctor in London, Ontario, Chris Lexley, who's pushing that every clinic of any size have a respiratory educator or respiratory therapist on staff so that the GP with suspecting COPD can send the patient to the respiratory therapist who is trained on giving spirometry tests and interpreting the results. So there's a real lack of access and lack of capability, and I think many of the provincial governments haven't even figured out what the pay scale should be for a doctor who spends the time giving the test. So there's a lot of work that has to be done.
So, Henry, those patients who are in the latter stages of COPD, are they actually, or maybe even in the middle stages, are they on waiting lists for maybe lung transplants?
Well, they could be. It's really quite a process to get on the list for a lung transplant. If we use Toronto General Hospital as an example, a number of our members have had double lung transplants there. So there's quite an interviewing process to begin with, and the doctors are really looking to make sure that you've got the stamina and the will to go through what you're going to go through. They don't want to be giving lungs to people who aren't going to take the medicines, who aren't going to go to rehab to the exercise classes. So they're not stingy with access, but they want to make sure that the people who receive the lungs are worthy, basically, are worthy of receiving the lungs. And then you also have to go for testing at the facility. The case I'm referring to is Toronto General, and that happens, I think, over a course of about a month, and then you get on the waiting list.
Now, are there support groups available to encourage people along their journey who are battling COPD?
Yes, there are. There's our group. There's the Lung Association, all of them across the country, as well as the Canadian Lung Association. There's a group called Respi Plus, and their program is called Living Well with COPD. So you go livingwellwithcopd.com, and they have a series of extremely good educational modules that will walk you through the process, as do the different lung associations. And the Ontario Lung Association, a couple of years ago, recast itself as the Lung Health Foundation. They're national now, and they have some very good programs, and they have very good support. So they have helplines and things of that nature.
And any final advice for those with COPD or those who think they may actually have it?
Well, if they're smokers, they should quit smoking right away, and not to consider vaping ever. Um, there are a lot of medicines they can take to help them quit smoking, but that is the number one thing that they can do for themselves, is to quit smoking.
Henry Roberts is the co-founder of the Chronic Obstructive Pulmonary Disease Association of Canada. Henry, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Al. Nice to meet you.